Hello, boys and girls. Hopefully, you have already seen my printf video because today we're going to talk about printf's brother, Scanf. Now, when you write your programs where you can't take inputs from users, this can get boring very fast. Now, we saw programs where you can add two numbers where the numbers were initialized within the code. This is called hard coding the inputs, and it's like writing a calculator which can only add two specific numbers. If you want to add two different numbers, you have to write a new calculator. Now, that's not very helpful. So, what would be nice is if we can write a program and then we ask Mr. C to ask us for the inputs to the program at the time when the program is to be executed, which is at runtime. This is possible using the scanf function. So we use printf to print things in runtime, and we use scanf to read things in runtime. That is why I said that they are brothers. Let's take a look at adding two user-provided numbers. Now, in this case, we'll quickly take the code first, and then I'll quickly tell you what it does. So here is your code, and this takes A and B from the user at the time of execution of the program, and it prints the sum. What it does is it declares these two boxes A and B with this statement int A comma B. Then it asks the user, please give me an input that looks like an integer. I will put it in the box A. Now this ampersand that I have before A is important. If you write this without the ampersand, you will get an error. Well, actually, you won't get an error, you'll get a garbage value. That is a subtlety that we will discuss a few weeks later in this course. But for now, just be aware that when you do scanf, you don't write the variable name by itself, you write it with an ampersand. Just use that as a mental placeholder. When we start talking about pointers and addressing, then this will all become clear. But anyway, we get these two inputs, and then the computer executes the printf statement after having taken these two inputs, and it prints the output. That's great. This is exactly what we wanted. But now, let's see how this works more interactively. So here I have a piece of code which essentially is the same as what I showed you before in the slides. And I will say enter both numbers separated by a space. This is my printf statement to begin with. And then I have a scanf statement which is taking two inputs one after the other. Remember the way we were able to print two numbers using the same printf statement? Scanf has that same property. I can take multiple inputs with the same scanf format string. I basically use the format string to specify to Mr. C how many inputs he has to be looking for, and then I just provide those inputs. So let's quickly compile this code. And it compiles without problems, and then we'll run the code. Enter both numbers. I'll enter 6 and 3. And you can see that the result is 9. Now, if I ran the code again, and I said 78 and 21, I would get the result is 99. So now with the same program, I am able to add any two numbers, not just two specific numbers that I had to hard code into the program. Look at this program. There are no hard-coded entries in it. I can print any sum with any two inputs that I want by using scanf. Another thing that you guys have to keep in mind is that this workflow of using scanf does not work in exactly the same way when we use Pruter as when we use some other editor. So we'll quickly walk through it again. We compiled the code, then we executed the code, then we provided inputs, and then we saw some result. This is what we do when we are using our own compiler. But when we are using Pruter, then life is a little bit different. So here is the same program, and in this I can execute it, and the program compiles successfully, and then I can ask to execute it, and again the program runs successfully. Let me make this slightly more legible. So the thing is that I already put the inputs beforehand here in the input tab on Pruter. Now, if I were to use the standard procedure that I was using with VS Code, and I said, well, let me first compile my code, then let me execute my code, and then I wait for Pruter to ask me for inputs, it's already too late. Pruter does not wait for input when we execute. For Pruter, the inputs have to be provided before I try to execute my code. So I provided the inputs, and now I execute. And in this case, the result is correct. And so this interactive prompt that I was giving in the VS Code program is not actually needed in Pruter. There's no interactivity that is possible in Pruter inputs. We simply provide the inputs before we execute in the input panel, and then we get some output. You have to be careful not to do this. So here I removed the space and I execute the program, and it gives me a result that is inaccurate, right? And here I can just do something like that, and again, it is going to return something that is inaccurate. So you have to be careful in how you provide the input. Just provide it with a space in between the two numbers, and you are fine. These are subtleties that are essentially a function of the web application that we are using, Pruter. This is not something that should affect your understanding of how Scanf works in actual practice in C. So now, let me quickly skip back to my slides, and then we'll keep talking about more aspects of Scanf. Let's quickly review the basics of how Scanf works in detail. What happens is that Mr. C, as always, likes to be told beforehand what we are going to ask him to do. And Scanf follows this exact same rule when it's telling Mr. C how to read. So the way we would usually tell this to a human is, please read one integer, then ignore all white space after that until I write another integer, and then read that second integer too. Store the value of the first integer that you read in one box and the value of the second integer in the second box. That's the way you would tell this to a human. Now, the distinction that you have to draw between printf and scanf is that scanf thinks that all spaces, tabs, and new lines mean the same thing. So you can write one number followed by a space and then the second number, or you can write one number followed by a tab and the second number, or you can write one number and then on the next line you can put the other number, and Scanf doesn't care. It just treats them the same way. That is not the case with printf, which is very finicky about spaces. Scanf is indifferent to spaces. It just treats spaces, tabs, and new lines all as white space. So when we try to tell Mr. Compiler how to read, we use this statement, scanf %d, ampersand a, ampersand b, and this sentence in C means the exact same thing as this text on the right, spoken in English to a human. please read one integer followed by some amount of white space followed by another integer. Put the leftmost integer into the first variable that you encounter in the list that follows the format string. That happens to be %A, so you put it in A, you put the other one in B. That is exactly the logic that we use for printf. That is exactly the logic we use for scanf. So you have to be careful with the white space aspect of scanf because it is so different from what you're used to with printf. Just have to bear it in mind. That's all. Another thing you have to realize is that scanf will never print anything. So you can say scanf hello $D, and you might have a vague expectation that this will actually print a hello followed by and await for your entry. And that doesn't happen. Scanf does not print anything. What scanf will do, or the way it will interpret it, is it will expect that when you, the user, are executing the code, you will write the word hello with H capital followed by a space followed by an integer, and it is that integer that follows hello space that you have to store in A. That is what Mr. C will think. Mr. C will not think that the computer has to print hello and then take an input. Mr. C will think that the user will write hello space and then a number. So just be very clear about your mental model of what Mr. C is doing when he sees scanf. Always use printf to print and scanf to read. They are for two separate purposes. You cannot use one in place of the other. So when you are in lab next week and you have some spare time, try out what happens with these entries. Scanf %D followed by a white space %D. Then you take the inputs. Scanf %D, comma %D. Scanf %D, new line %D. With a tab instead of new line. With a escape for the quotes on both sides. And with the word hello in between. Now, I'll already give you the answer, and you have to verify that my answer makes sense with the outputs that you get for each of these possibilities. Wherever there's white space, whether it's a tab or a new line or a space, the outputs or the inputs are going to be scanned exactly the same way in all cases. Wherever there's a non-white space character, scanf is going to expect that format to be followed for the input. For example, in this case where you have %D followed by a comma followed by the next %D, it is going to expect that you'll have a number followed by a comma followed by the next number as the input. Otherwise, it is going to give you unexpected behavior. So be sure to try these exercises in lab. They are a very good way of trying to understand Mr. C's mental model with respect to scanning.